My wife had our locks changed before I even got back from the hardware store. I didn't find that out standing on my own porch, either. I found it out from a delivery driver named Derek, who handed me a taped-up notice with the look of a man who'd rather be anywhere else on earth. "You're not going to like this," he said. "Wanted to hand it to you myself instead of leaving it taped to the door like a coward. Give me what? Just read it before you go inside. If you can even get inside." He got back in his van before I finished opening the envelope. 22 years married to Angela Ford. 19 years building a software company together, starting in our unfinished basement in the Washington Park neighborhood of Denver, ending with a $33 million acquisition offer from a Chicago private equity fund. And on the day the deal was announced, she had a locksmith rekey the house before I finished buying a bag of deck screws at the Ace Hardware on South Pearl Street. I didn't know it yet, but the lock wasn't going to be the part that actually hurt. I met Angela at a coffee shop on South Gaylord Street in 2005. It's a poke bowl place now. Everything changes. When I was a mechanical engineering dropout working nights at a data center off I-25, and she was finishing her MBA at the University of Denver. 8 months later, we were engaged. 2 years after that, married by the boathouse in Washington Park, because it was free, and because neither of us wanted anything fancier. The company came out of an idea I scribbled on a legal pad at our kitchen table at 3 o'clock in the morning, trying to solve a routing problem that was eating me alive at my day job. I built the algorithm myself, filed a provisional patent using forms off the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office website, because we couldn't afford a lawyer. My name went on it. Sole inventor, Mike Nelson. Angela turned that algorithm into a business. She wrote the pitch decks. She learned to read a cap table from nothing. She walked into rooms full of bolder investors and talked them into believing that a guy who fixed his own furnace and a woman who'd never run a company could build something worth funding. She was good at it. Genuinely, remarkably good. I want to be fair because I still believe in being fair even now. Angela built Fieldstone Analytics as much as I did. In some ways more. She's the reason it had customers. I'm the reason it worked. By 2015, we had 40 employees in an office off Spear Boulevard. Angela became CEO. I stayed head of engineering because I hated meetings, and she was better in them than I'd ever be. That felt like a fair split. It still would have if she hadn't decided somewhere along the way that the split also meant the credit could quietly become hers alone. I remember the exact dinner where I first noticed it. A company holiday party at a restaurant in Lodo, one of those brick-walled places with string lights, and a reporter from a local business journal working the room for a feature on Denver's growing tech scene. She found Angela first. "So, how did Fieldstone Analytics get started?" the reporter asked, notebook out. "I saw a gap in the logistics software market," Angela said, "and built a team around solving it." I was standing right there, holding 2 drinks, one of them hers. She didn't look at me once during the answer. I told myself it was just a soundbite. Reporters want sound bites, not footnotes about kitchen tables and legal pads. I let it go. I was good back then at letting things go. Psychologists have a name for what happens in moments like that. They call it credit erosion. The slow process by which one partner's daily unglamorous contribution stops registering as contribution at all and starts registering instead as background. Not because it stopped matching, but because it never stopped happening. It becomes furniture. You stop noticing furniture. You only notice it again when it's gone from the room. Our daughter Sophie is 24 now, works in Seattle, and she's going to matter later in this story. So hold on to her. The Monday everything came apart started with my phone buzzing on the kitchen counter while I was rinsing a coffee mug. "Priscilla, did you know about this?" There was a screenshot attached, an internal company memo sent 30 minutes earlier to all of Fieldstone staff announcing that the company had signed a letter of intent to be acquired by Continental Ridge Partners for $33 million. I called Angela. She picked up on the 4th ring, out of breath, like she was walking somewhere important. "Mike, I can't really talk right now. You sold the company, and I heard about it from Priscilla. I was going to tell you tonight." "Tell me what exactly?" "That this is happening, or that it already happened." "It's not. This isn't about you and me right now. This is business." "It's not about you and me," I repeated. "Angela, I built the engine this entire company runs on. At a kitchen table in our house." "I know that. Nobody's forgetting that. Feels like somebody already has." "Mike, I have Continental Ridge's partners in the building right now. Can we please do this tonight? Like adults?" "Sure," I said. "Adults. That's a word for it. She hung up first. She'd never done that before in 24 years. Small thing. I noticed it anyway. 2 days later, on a Wednesday, Continental Ridge sent their due diligence team into the Fieldstone offices. 3 lawyers and an associate, sharp suits that made Denver casual look like a costume. Priscilla texted me a play-by-play through most of it. Half out of loyalty to me, half because she was rattled watching it happen. Priscilla, they're pulling everything. Cap table, every employment agreement, every patent filing. Org charts going back to 2007. Priscilla, Angela's practically living in the conference room. Me. Did they say anything about the IP specifically? Priscilla, just that IP title verification is on their checklist for next week. Why should I be worried about something? Me. Not yet. I didn't know at that point how true that answer actually was. By Friday, 3 days after the announcement, Angela came home and sat down across from me at our own kitchen table. The same wood grain I used to sketch algorithms on, and told me she wanted a divorce effective immediately. I already talked to a family law attorney, she said, about an accelerated separation given the transaction timeline. The transaction timeline? Mike, the deal needs clean corporate optics. A messy divorce filing mid-acquisition looks bad to Continental Ridge's board. I need you out by the weekend. You're divorcing me for optics. I'm divorcing you because we haven't been a real marriage in years, and you know it. The timing just happens to matter right now. Which part haven't we been real about, exactly? The part where I built the product, or the part where I kept my mouth shut while you told a reporter you built the company alone? That landed. I watched it land. She didn't have an answer ready for it, which almost never happened with Angela. That's not fair, she said finally. Neither is a locksmith showing up before I've even packed a bag. Nobody's changed any locks, Mike. Don't be dramatic. We'll see, I said, and I meant it more as an exit line than a prediction. I didn't know yet how right I was about to be. I need an answer tonight. Are you going to make this difficult, or are you going to be reasonable? I'll be out Saturday, I said. That's the only answer you're getting tonight. Thank you for not making this harder than it has to be. Don't thank me yet. Notice the phrasing she reached for that night. Clean corporate optics. Accelerated separation. Deal needs. Not, I don't love you anymore. Not even, I want out. Language that reframes a person as a liability to be managed instead of a human being to be reckoned with. Psychologists sometimes call this dehumanizing rationalization. The conscience doesn't have to account for what it's done to a person once that person has been quietly recast as a problem on a checklist. I didn't know it yet, but the thing that was about to blow that acquisition wide open wasn't anything I was planning to do. It was already sitting in a filing cabinet in a folder she had never once asked to open. That Saturday morning before I left, my brother Danny called from Fort Collins, where he runs a small landscaping business, and has never once pretended to understand a word of what I do for a living. Angela's really kicking you out. Over the phone, she made it sound like you two agreed on this. We agreed the way you agree to a hostage situation, Danny. She named the terms. I picked the ending that let me keep breathing. You want to stay with us? Kelly already made up the guest room. She heard about it before I even called you. I appreciate it. I need to be in the city for a while, though. This isn't just a divorce. What's that supposed to mean? I found something in the company paperwork. I don't fully understand what it means yet myself, honestly. I just know it's not nothing. Mike, what did you find? Give me a few days. I'll tell you when I actually know what I'm holding. You've always done this, Danny said. Sat on something huge like it's a normal afternoon. Dad used to say you'd announce the house was on fire in the same tone you'd announce dinner was ready. Dad wasn't wrong. Just don't do anything you can't undo out of spite. That's all I'm asking. I'm not doing this out of spite, I said, and I believed it when I said it. Even if I understood days later why nobody who'd just watched their marriage end that fast would automatically believe me. I left that Saturday with 2 suitcases, my laptop, and a banker's box of old engineering notebooks that Angela's assistant had already packed for me. Small mercy, or maybe just efficiency. When I got to the porch, sure enough, my key didn't turn. Not jammed, different. She'd meant it when she said nobody's changed any locks. She just hadn't done it yet at the time she said it. I stood on that porch for a solid minute, key in my hand, staring at a door I'd repainted myself for summers ago, and I felt something shift in my chest that I still can't fully describe. Not rage. Not yet. Something colder. Something that made a decision before the rest of me caught up to it. I checked into an extended stay hotel off East Colfax Avenue. Mini fridge. A view of a Conoco station. The kind of place where the ice machine down the hall never stops rattling. I sat on the edge of a stiff queen bed with my laptop open and did the one thing 24 years of marriage had somehow let me put off. I read our patent file. Actually read it line by line, cross-referencing every filing against the USPTO's own public database, which anyone can search for free if they know what number to look up. Here's what I found. When I filed that original provisional patent back in 2005, before Fieldstone Analytics existed as a company, it named exactly one inventor, me. When the company incorporated in 2007, our first lawyer, a young guy working out of an office in the Denver Tech Center, retired now, drew up an intellectual property assignment to move my personal ownership of the patent into the company in exchange for founders' equity. Completely standard. I remember signing something back then. I remember a notary in the room. A lot of initials. The kind of paperwork blur you don't question when you're 29 and starting a company with the woman you love. But that assignment only covered the provisional patent. When it converted into a full utility patent in 2009, a separate federal filing with its own inventor declaration, nobody ever filed a new assignment to match it. The 2007 paperwork simply didn't reach that far. It was like signing over the title to your car, and then the dealership swaps the engine, and nobody updates the paperwork to match what's actually under the hood. Under U.S. patent law, an issued patent belongs to its named inventor unless that inventor has formally assigned it in writing. And that assignment has to be recorded with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office to hold up against anyone who buys the company later. Fieldstone Analytics had spent 17 years telling the world, telling investors, telling its own employees, telling Continental Ridge partners, that it owned the routing patent free and clear. It didn't. I did. I sat there with gas station coffee going cold on the nightstand and laughed out loud once. The kind of laugh that isn't happiness. It's just what your body does when it runs out of other options. 22 years of marriage, and the one document Angela never asked to see in her life was the only thing standing between her and $33 million. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there staring at a water stain on the ceiling shaped vaguely like Nebraska, running the math over and over, trying to decide if I was about to do something petty or something honest. By sunrise, I still hadn't fully decided. But I decided enough to make a phone call. I want to be honest about something here, because it would be easy to make myself sound like a mastermind who'd been quietly sitting on a secret weapon for years waiting for the right moment to detonate it. That's not what happened. What happened is that a woman I'd loved for 2 decades threw me out of my own house, with less warning than she'd give a contractor she was firing. And 3 days later, the gap she'd never once bothered to check turned out to be the only thing standing between her and the biggest transaction of her life. Thomas filed a formal notice that Wednesday, 6 days after the acquisition was announced, 3 days after I'd been served divorce papers, informing Continental Ridge's counsel and Fieldstone's board that the core patent underlying the company's entire product had never been properly assigned, and that I, as the patent's sole inventor and current owner of record, had not consented to its transfer, licensing, or sale. Priscilla texted me that afternoon. She still checked in on me, even after everything. Priscilla, you would not believe what just happened in the boardroom. Me. Try me. Priscilla, Continental Ridge's lead counsel, walked in holding some kind of legal notice and asked Angela point blank, in front of 2 of the partners, "Who is Mike Nelson to this company?" Priscilla. She didn't have an answer, Mike. She just sat there. One of the partners actually said, "I thought this was a straightforward asset sale." And the room went dead silent. Me. What did Angela say? Priscilla. Eventually, she said you were a former technical advisor. Mike. A former technical advisor? After 19 years. I didn't respond to that one for a while, not because I didn't have anything to say, because I did. And none of it felt like it belonged in a text message. The deal didn't die instantly. Big transactions never do. They go on life support first. Continental Ridge suspended the closing timeline. Their financing bank, ready to wire funds that Friday, put the transfer on hold pending resolution of a title defect in core intellectual property. Priscilla told me Angela stayed at the office until almost 2 o'clock in the morning that Wednesday with the company's outside counsel, trying to find a way around a problem that had my name on every page of it. There wasn't one. Before Angela ever called, Continental Ridge's lead counsel, a clipped, precise woman named Elaine Foster, who'd flown in from Chicago for a closing that no longer had a date, called Thomas directly and asked to loop me in on a short conference call. Thomas patched me in from his office speakerphone. "Mr. Nelson, I want to be straightforward with you," Foster said. "My client has no interest in a protracted title fight. We evaluate hundreds of deals a year. When we find a defect like this, our only real question is how fast it can be cured and at what price before we decide whether to keep going or walk." "That's fair," I said. "I'm not trying to make this complicated. I want the record to reflect what's actually true, and I want to be compensated like someone who's actually true reflects." "Understood. I'll say this much because I think it helps you understand your own position. My due diligence team flagged this kind of gap as a top 5 risk category before we ever sent anyone to Denver. We see it more than you'd think in companies run by a founding couple. One spouse handles the technical side, one handles the business side, and somewhere in the middle, the actual legal housekeeping falls through the cracks. It happens because people trust each other, which is frankly exactly why it's dangerous. So, what happens if I don't sign anything at all? Then Continental Ridge walks effective immediately, and Fieldstone Analytics keeps a patent that a court could later invalidate the company's claim to indefinitely. That's not a threat, Mr. Nelson. That's just what a title defect this clean does to a deal this size. I'd encourage you and Mrs. Ford's team to resolve it quickly. Every week this drags is a week our financing terms get more expensive for everyone, including eventually you." She hung up without much more than that. Thomas looked at me across his desk after the line clicked off. "She's not wrong, and she's not bluffing," he said. "Foster doesn't waste breath on people she isn't taking seriously. You should feel good about that, actually. It means she's already told her own client you're not a problem that gets solved with a cheap check." "I don't feel good about any of this, Thomas. I feel like I'm dismantling my own marriage with a crowbar." "You didn't build the crowbar, Mike. You just finally picked it up. There's a phrase for what happened between Angela and me over those 17 years. The trust that let a filing gap sit unnoticed for almost 2 decades. Family business researchers call it institutional blindness in intimate partnerships. When two people who love each other also run something together, they tend to stop verifying each other's work the way they'd verify a stranger's. Trust becomes a substitute for oversight. It usually costs nothing. Once in a great while, it costs $33 million. She called me the following Friday, exactly 1 week after telling me to be out of the house by the weekend. "We need to talk," she said, "in person. This is serious, Mike." "I'm aware. I read the patent filings." "Did you?" Silence. A long one. It told me everything I needed to know. That in 19 years of running that company, my wife had never once looked at the single document that determined who actually owned the thing she was about to sell. "There wasn't a reason to," she said finally. "I trusted our lawyer handled it back in 2007. He handled half of it. Nobody ever finished the other half. And nobody ever asked me because nobody thought they needed to. Are you doing this to punish me?" "I'm not doing anything, Angela. I'm just the only person who actually read the paperwork. This is going to cost me the whole deal, Mike. Do you understand that? 19 years of work gone because of a filing gap from 2009. 19 years of our work," I said. "And it's not gone. It's just no longer free." "Meaning what?" "Meaning I'll see you tomorrow. Bring your lawyer." "I'll bring mine." "Fine," she said and hung up. No goodbye this time either. We met at a diner on South Broadway, not our old place. I couldn't have done that to either of us. A newer spot with a good pie case and mediocre coffee. Angela looked like she hadn't slept in 2 days because she probably hadn't. "You could have told me," she said, sliding into the booth. "Instead of blowing up the whole deal out of nowhere. You could have told me," I said. It's a strange thing to hear from the woman who had my locks changed while I was buying deck screws. She didn't answer that. She just stared at the menu she wasn't going to order from. "I'm not trying to destroy anything you built," I said. "I helped build it, too, in case that slipped your mind. I'm trying to get a straight answer about what's actually mine after 19 years of assuming somebody else was keeping track. What do you want, Mike? Right now, I want you to admit out loud that you were about to sell something you didn't fully own, and that the only reason it didn't happen is because I happened to read a folder you never opened." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, quietly, "Fine. You're right. I didn't check. I should have checked." "Thank you," I said. "That's the first honest thing you've said to me in about 3 weeks. So what happens now? You've got Continental Ridge's whole legal team treating me like I tried to commit fraud. Nobody's saying fraud. Thomas explained it to your lawyers the same way he explained it to me. This is a paperwork gap, not a crime. But it's a gap that only I can close. And I'm not closing it for free, and I'm not closing it because you asked nicely over pie. You've changed, she said. And there was something almost wounded in how she said it. No, I said. I finally read the paperwork. That's different from changing. Thomas had told me exactly what my leverage was and wasn't before I ever sat down in that booth. And I want to be clear about it because I've heard enough of these stories to know some of them stretch the truth about how this stuff actually works. I didn't own Fieldstone Analytics. I didn't get to walk in and demand the whole $33 million. What I owned was the patent the entire product was built on, and under federal law, that gave me the right to refuse assignment, license it elsewhere instead, or negotiate fair compensation for transferring it as part of the sale. Continental Ridge's counsel had already made it very clear to Angela's team the deal would not close without a clean notarized assignment from me, with no ambiguity a future buyer could ever pick apart again. That gave me exactly one thing, not revenge, leverage. And for the first time in almost 20 years, a seat back at the table I'd built with my own hands, and then let myself get quietly pushed away from. The negotiation took 11 days. I want to walk through it honestly, because the version where I show up and demand half of everything and get it by lunchtime would make a better highlight reel. But it isn't what happened, and I promised myself I'd tell this one straight. Angela's first offer, delivered through her attorney, was $200,000 for a voluntary and immediate assignment, framed as a courtesy given our marriage. Thomas read it to me over speakerphone and actually laughed. That's an insult wearing a business suit, he said. The patent is the deal, Mike. Without it, there's no $33 million. Without it, Continental Ridge walks away entirely. You're not a formality in this transaction. You're the reason there's anything to sell. So what do we counter with? Something that reflects what you actually are, co-inventor of record, not a footnote. We countered. I never asked for half the acquisition price. Half of $33 million wouldn't have reflected what I'd actually contributed relative to what Angela and the team built around the technology once I'd handed it to them. What I asked for was three things: formal recognition as co-inventor of record on the patent, alongside two former engineers whose routing improvements over the years genuinely deserve credit they'd never gotten, a clean assignment of my ownership stake to Continental Ridge in exchange for $6 million, and a small ongoing royalty on the technology's use, structured to pay out over the remaining life of the patent instead of vanishing the moment the deal closed. Angela's lawyers fought it for 4 days. This is extortion, her attorney said on one call. And I remember Thomas's voice going flat and calm in a way I'd come to recognize as his warning shot. It's federal patent law, Thomas said. My client is the sole legal owner of the asset your client's company has spent 17 years claiming as its own without ever completing the paperwork. Call it whatever helps you sleep. The number stands. $6 million is not a courtesy figure, counselor. It's not meant to be a courtesy. It's meant to be fair market value for what he's giving up, plus compensation for 19 years your client spent building a company on an asset she never fully owned. If you'd like to explain to Continental Ridge why the deal collapsed over a $200,000 lowball, that's certainly your right. They came back at $3 million on day 6. We held at 6. They came back at 4.5 on day 8 with a smaller royalty attached, trying to trade one number for the other. Thomas wouldn't let me take it. Hold the line, he told me. Every day they negotiate instead of walking is a day that tells you Continental Ridge needs this deal more than they're letting on. Desperation runs both directions in a negotiation, Mike. Right now, it's running toward them. On day 10, Angela called me directly, skipping the lawyers for the first time. Can we just talk? No attorneys on the line for 5 minutes. I'm listening. I'm not fighting you because I think you're wrong about the patent, she said. I'm fighting because agreeing to your number means admitting in writing that I ran a company for 19 years and never once checked whether it actually owned its own core technology. That's humiliating, Mike. Professionally, personally, all of it. I know, I said, and I meant it, but it's true whether you sign or not. The only thing signing changes is whether the company survives the correction with its acquisition intact or whether it doesn't. You could have just let it close and said nothing. You'd have had nothing to negotiate with, but you also wouldn't have humiliated me in front of a room full of Chicago lawyers. I could have, I agreed. But you changed my locks before I finished buying deck screws, Angela. I stopped being interested in protecting your comfort the second I stood on that porch with a key that didn't work. She didn't have anything to say to that. What I found out later, again from Priscilla, was that the call that actually broke the stalemate wasn't between me and Angela at all. It was between Angela and Fieldstone's own board, two investors who'd put early money into the company back in 2011 and had watched their stake balloon in value for over a decade. They basically told her to stop stalling, Priscilla said when she finally told me the story over coffee weeks later. One of the board members, this guy Harold who never says much in meetings, apparently just looked at her and said, "You're letting pride cost this company $33 million. Sign whatever the man is asking for, and let's close this deal before Continental Ridge finds a reason to walk on their own." That had to sting. She didn't say a word the rest of the meeting, just nodded. 2 days after that board meeting, her lawyers accepted the $6 million and the royalty structure essentially unchanged from what Thomas and I had proposed on day one. We signed on a Tuesday, 2 weeks after a confused delivery driver had handed me an eviction notice on my own front step. Thomas sat beside me. Angela's attorney sat beside her. Angela and I barely spoke beyond what the paperwork required. "You really weren't planning this?" she said quietly while the notary organized her stamps. It wasn't a question. "No," I said. "I was planning to grill something on the back deck and go to bed early. You're the one who moved the furniture around." At one point, signing the assignment page, my hand actually shook a little. Not from fear, from the strange specific weight of watching something I'd sketched on a legal pad in 2005 become on paper officially and permanently mine. In a way it had somehow never quite been while I was married to the person running the company built on top of it. The deal closed 9 days later. $33 million minus my settlement minus fees moved into accounts that no longer had anything to do with me. Angela kept the house. I didn't fight her for it. I'd never wanted the house nearly as much as I wanted to matter. And by the time this whole thing wrapped up, I finally did in the one column that had always mattered to me most, the one with my actual name on it. Sophie flew home from Seattle while everything was finalizing. We sat at that same diner on South Broadway. I go there a lot now, honestly. The pie's grown on me. And she asked me a question I wasn't ready for. "Are you happy, Dad?" I thought about it longer than the question probably deserved. "I'm not happy your mom and I are done," I said. "I loved her. Some part of me probably still does, the way you love a house you used to live in. But I'm not going to pretend I'm sorry I stopped letting myself disappear inside something I helped build with my own 2 hands. That part I'm proud of." "For what it's worth," Sophie said, "I always knew the algorithm was yours. Mom used to say it in interviews like it came out of nowhere. I remember watching you build it. I was 7. You let me hold the soldering iron once, and Mom nearly had a heart attack. She still doesn't know I let you do that twice." "Dad." "What? You didn't burn anything that time." Sophie laughed, the first real laugh either of us had managed in weeks, and reached across the table, putting her hand over mine. "Can I ask you something else?" Sophie said, "Do you regret not checking the paperwork sooner? Like years ago?" "Every day, a little. But if I'd checked it years ago and fixed it quietly, none of this would have forced the conversation your mother and I clearly needed to have. Sometimes the crack in the foundation is the only thing that gets anybody to finally look at the house." That's annoyingly wise for a guy who once tried to fix our dishwasher with a butter knife. That dishwasher worked for another 6 years after that, for the record. "I always wondered why you never fought harder for credit," she said. "At the office, in interviews. All those years. Honestly, I never thought I needed to. I figured the work would speak for itself, eventually. Took your mother selling the company out from under both of us to teach me that sometimes the work needs a signature attached to it, or somebody else's name ends up on the whole story. So what now?" "Now," I said, "I get to build something with my name on it from the start. No confusion required. I used the settlement to start something I'd wanted since I was 26 and too broke to consider it. A small engineering consulting firm. Just me and 2 contractors out of a rented office in the Baker neighborhood, 3 miles from the house Angela kept. We solve routing and logistics problems for companies too small to ever land on Continental Ridge's radar. I like the work. I like that every contract has my name on it clearly with no ambiguity anybody would ever need a patent attorney to untangle years down the line." Priscilla left Fieldstone about 4 months after the deal closed and came to work for me instead. Her first week, we were unpacking boxes in the new office in the Baker neighborhood, and she said something that stopped me mid-motion, holding a stack of file folders. "I have to tell you something, and I need you to not hate me for it." "That's a strange way to start a Monday." "I found the assignment gap 18 months before you did, Mike. During a records cleanup, back when I was still in operations, I pulled the old incorporation file for an unrelated audit and noticed the 2009 filing didn't have a matching assignment. I knew exactly what it meant. I set the folders down slowly. "You knew this whole time." "I sat on it," she said. "I'm not proud of that." Angela had passed me over for the VP role twice, promised me an equity refresh both times, and quietly let it lapse both times. I told myself I was being loyal by staying quiet. The truth is, I was waiting. I didn't know for what exactly until the acquisition got announced, and I realized if this deal ever actually tried to close, that gap wasn't going away on its own. So, I sent you that screenshot the second the internal memo went out, faster than I needed to, if I'm honest. I wanted you looking at the paperwork before anybody had time to think about closing anything quietly. I stood there for a long moment, running the timeline back through my head. The text that started all of it, the play-by-play updates through due diligence week, all of it recast in a different light. Priscilla hadn't just been a friend feeding me information out of loyalty. She'd been the one who'd loaded the gun more than a year before I ever picked it up and waited for the moment it would matter most to hand it to me. "Are you angry?" she asked. "I'm trying to figure out if I should be. You didn't lie to me. You just let me think I found something on my own that you'd already been sitting on. Would it have changed anything if you'd known sooner?" I thought about that honestly, the way I try to think about most things. "No," I said finally. "It still would have ended the same way. I still would have read the paperwork. I still would have called Thomas. You just made sure I actually looked instead of letting 19 years of trusting the wrong things keep me from ever opening that folder at all." She let out a breath she'd clearly been holding since she started talking. "So we're okay?" "We're okay," I said. "Just no more silent partnerships in my company, Priscilla. If you find something, you tell me the same day. Deal?" There's a version of this story where I'm the only one who acted. That version isn't true, and I'd rather tell you the honest one. What actually happened is that two people who'd both been quietly overlooked by the same company in different ways, for different reasons, ended up handing each other exactly what the other one needed at exactly the right moment. She gave me the nudge to look, and I turned out to be the one with the standing to actually do something once I did. Neither of us planned it that way. It just turned out that way. Psychologists studying long-term recovery after a major betrayal describe something they call post-adversity recalibration. Not simply bouncing back to where you were before the damage, but arriving somewhere genuinely new with a clearer sense of what you're actually worth and who's actually been standing beside you the whole time, even quietly, even from a distance. Angela and I finalized the divorce 2 months after the acquisition closed. Priscilla told me Continental Ridge kept her on as an advisor through the transition, then quietly let the arrangement lapse once it ended. I don't know what she's doing these days. I've stopped checking. I didn't know it yet, sitting in that room off Colfax Avenue with a stiff mattress and a Conoco sign glowing through the blinds. But the woman who threw me out because I'd become an inconvenience was about to learn something I'd known all along and never once thought to use as a weapon. You can build an entire company around a person, sell it for millions of dollars, and change every lock in the house, and still not be able to erase a name from a federal patent filing just because you've stopped wanting to see it there. Some signatures don't come off that easily.